Welcome to Therapy Unplugged, Empowerment, Laughter, and Life, a podcast where two therapists offer insights to the real-life issues we all experience. We are your hosts, Sarah Benoit and Megan McCullough. Welcome to our first podcast episode. Today, we're going to talk about the idea that you're not alone. Many times people come to therapy thinking they are alone in their problems, their thoughts, and their feelings. We're here today to let you know that that could not be further from the truth. Megan, would you like to start us off today?
I would love to. Thank you, Sarah. So, I'm pretty excited to start this first episode in the way in which we are. And I'm going to just share quickly two reasons why I think that you are not alone is a great place for us to start. So, the first reason is that this is going to be a great way for the two of us to share the types of general topics and issues that clients bring to us in session that we really want to dive into. So this could be, and in no way will it be an exhaustive list, but I think it's going to be a conversation between the two of us that will just naturally, right? We're going to be bringing up topics that we will be diving into in future episodes. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And then the second reason why I am really happy to start with this particular episode is I want to go back to the title, right? So the title of this episode is You Are Not Alone. So what do we mean by that? I think in this case what we mean is that we want to let our listeners know that no matter what you may be facing, we both have so much experience sharing space with clients who come into session sharing their problems, their deepest fears, right? The things that are keeping them awake at night. And what I've come to realize personally through years and years of sharing space with clients is that so much of what clients bring to me is so much more similar than different, right? And I've found that through the years of doing therapy that these themes emerge that make me realize we're really, in my opinion, more alike than we are different. So that is really why, at least I'm excited to start with this episode. So that brings me to one of my first themes. Through the years, I have seen probably hundreds at this point. I'm sure you as well. Hundreds of clients in my private practice. I have worked with children. I've worked with teenagers. I've worked with adults and couples. In fact, right now in my practice, my youngest client is 22 and my oldest client is 71. Right? So there's a wide range of ages and stages of development that I'm working with. And so without a doubt, and I'm sure, Sarah, you would probably agree with this, on the surface, my clients look very different. They come to me with different narratives. They come to me with different issues. They come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. They've lived in many different places. They're raised in different ways. And so on the surface, while all these differences emerge, there is also a lot that threads us all together. And one thing I just want to point out is courage, right? So it takes a lot of courage to step into a therapist's office.
It does.
Yeah. It takes a lot of courage to share, some of your vulnerabilities. And one of the things that I really love about this job is getting to witness the trust that clients place in me when they do step into this space of therapy. They share their desires, they share their deepest fears. And I cannot tell you how many times that I've had a client come into session and they are afraid that what they're about ready to share with me is something that surely I have not heard of before. I don't know if you've experienced
All
that
the time. Yep.
all the time, right? And I think it can be really reassuring to let them know that I guarantee you, on some level, I've heard this before. Now, the details may be different, but the general themes underneath, when you start to peel back the layers, are very similar. So that brings me, Sarah, to my first theme that I uncover over and over again. And it is the theme that we believe that we are not enough,
Mm,
that we are not enough exactly as we are. This is a really big one for me. So I had shared in the introduction, I'm a hypnotherapist as well. And in my hypnotherapy practice, one of the most powerful statements that I put into my script, and one of the statements that probably gets the most powerful reaction and emotional reaction, is a very simple sentence, and it is, I am enough. I have put this into my hypnosis script with clients and seen tears. I've seen anger in the sense of, that's not true, right? I am not enough, but I am enough is something that I think we all need to hear over and over again. And now, one thing also probably to make clear here is that I'm not suggesting that my clients come into session saying, "Oh, yeah, I'm not enough. I'm here. I really want to change that." I'm not saying that that sentence is actually coming out of their mouths, but it could be, for example, that a client comes in with insecurities about their romantic relationship.
Mhm.
Perhaps they're coming in due to stress at work because they're working extra hours to please their boss. So they may come in with a work issue. They may come in with a partnership issue. They may come in with an issue with their child. But as we peel back the layers, a lot of times what I find is that underneath the stress is this idea that I'm not enough. So I'll work extra hard to feel like I'm enough. Or I'm not enough, so I'll do whatever I can to keep my partner happy so that they love me and they stay with me. Sarah, do you ever see this theme come up for you in your sessions?
I do, Megan, a lot. And it's kind of interesting when you were talking about how you don't necessarily have people come in and make that statement. I get exactly what you're getting. I get it where it's more subtle, where maybe they feel that they're not fulfilling a role, whether it's as a spouse, an employee, a friend, a parent. But I actually do have people say
Mhm.
that phrase, I'm not enough. And where it comes out, a lot of it is, as I mentioned, I'm a trauma therapist. So when I'm doing EMDR with a client, one of the things that we do is we outline what is the negative overall cognition that you have about yourself. And
Mm,
then what do you want the positive overall cognition to be? And it very often is that negative cognition is I am not enough.
yeah.
And it is so powerful, like you said, to watch, especially using EMDR in particular, over time, that transformation and to be able to go back to that statement over and over and see over time that it has less and less power over somebody and how that cognition can change about themselves.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And do you have any ideas or anything to share about where you feel so we're both agreeing, right? That
Mhm.
like, yeah, I'm not enough is just prevalent in ourselves and our society. Do you have any ideas about where this idea might come from?
I think it can come from a lot of places.
Yeah.
I think, most people, when they also think of therapy, they think, oh my gosh, I have to go back to my childhood. And some do. I mean, it makes
Mhm,
sense that
mhm.
some do. But that for some, that is where it starts, whether it's an implied message, whether it's a direct message that they may get from family members, from teachers, from peers. It could be, let's just say that that isn't the case, and it's maybe it comes from teachers, maybe it doesn't happen until you're an adult and you're starting your career.
Mhm.
And especially, I mean, I think we've gotten a little bit better about it today, but when you're a salaried employee, the expectation is that you work until the job is done.
Mhm.
So if you're putting in 80 hours a week, is that enough? If
Right,
you're
right.
finishing I remember being in community mental health and getting emails at 10:30 at night, and I absolutely refused to work at 10:30 at night.
Yeah,
I wasn't doing that, and I don't function my best then, but, that's what some people did, and there was a bit of an expectation to reply, and at least
mm,
from where I sat, that wasn't gonna happen, but that could be, again, it's that not I'm not enough theme, like, I'm not doing enough, I'm not saying enough, I'm not being enough. And I think what ties into that, and I don't know if you see this, but it's kind of an offshoot of the not enough. It's a theme of needing to have it all figured out too.
yeah,
I see that with younger people, especially the transition from say high school to college or even college to young adulthood. And you mentioned earlier with the range of people that you see, I think when we think of developmental stages, we think of kids, but it happens throughout our lives. And I think those are ripe opportunities during those transitions for people to feel like they're not enough.
absolutely, absolutely. Yep, yep, I agree with all of that, and one other thing I'll add to, the question of, well, what where does this come from? I
Mhm.
don't know if it comes from this place, but I think without a doubt that, especially, let's say, in the last decade, that social media has really well, I'll put it this way, perpetuated, right?
Yes.
This idea that we're not enough. And it's I don't think a week goes by without a client stating to me that, they went on Facebook and this thing they saw their friend doing just really made them feel like they're not doing enough, right?
Mhm.
Or, there's so many ways I think that social media can contribute to these ideas. So yeah, I just wanted to add that in as well.
And I completely agree. And social media, I mean, that's one of the things I want to at some point do an episode around
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's, and people, it's that comparison. It's, am I making enough money? Am I taking enough vacations? Am I well enough informed? Am I paying attention to the right things? Am I posting enough? I mean, I remember when I got married and someone said to me, they said, "Well, it's not on Facebook, so it's not official." And I was like, "Okay, I guess I better do that." I
Mm,
so, it's all of those things, and I think you bring up an important point, which is that comparison. I think, as humans, we do that, and I
mm,
think there's a very fine line for because we all compare, whether we want to or not. I think there's a very fine line between that being helpful and harmful.
absolutely. Yes. Yep. So, I think that the last thing that I will say for now on
Mhm.
this general theme, although we could, again, I think with any of these themes, we could probably do a whole podcast in and of itself on
Yes.
these themes, right? But the last thing that I will say about this theme of I am enough is that I think this is a theme that can lead us to take on more, and taking on more can lead us to the state of chronic overwhelm. And we're actually dedicating a whole session, our next podcast episode, to chronic overwhelm.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that there's a huge connection between just this chronic overwhelm that I see, I would say, on some level in most of my clients, and this connection, right, to just never feeling like we're enough. So do you have any,
Mm.
other thoughts on that?
Not on the "I'm not enough" part, because I totally agree with you. I mean, that could be its own,
Yeah,
we could keep going forever. Um,
absolutely.
I do think I wanna bring up, if it's okay, some of the other themes that I see,
Yes.
and a big one, and they're 2, but to me, they're intertwined, and that's guilt and shame.
Mm,
And I think both of those really tie into the not being enough part as well. I have a lot of, and again, to kind of piggyback on that idea of where do these ideas of guilt or shame come from? And it could be, it could be how you're raised. It could be your faith. It could be your experiences. Again, being a trauma therapist, there's a ton of shame that comes with trauma. And, the guilt too, it's interesting because when I see these things, I see them on a broad brush kind of, I guess I would say, like, bigger decision making. Like, if you have to make large decisions in life,
mhm,
they feel
mhm.
guilty about maybe if they have to move, like who they're leaving behind. If they, or even if they want to move, it's not about a have to, maybe they want to. But then it's even much smaller, like, what are we going to have for dinner? There's,
Mhm.
well, what if I decided I wanted fish and my husband really wanted chicken? He's going to be so disappointed that I feel guilty that I made that decision. I mean, it sounds like a ridiculous example, but I think that's how fine a detail it can be for some people. And I see it where people, there's some really intangible things like, well, if I make this decision, I feel guilty because I might hurt their feelings.
Mhm,
Instead of
mhm.
owning other people's experiences, if you will.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think, and again, tying into the guilt and the shame part is, and tell me if you agree with this. I mean, this feels like a little bit in the weeds, but it ties to me because when I think of guilt and I think of shame, I also think of self-esteem.
Yes.
And when I think of self-esteem, one of the things that I think is important is I see this a lot where people don't know how to get their needs met.
Mhm, mhm.
And they don't know how to, and when I say that, I mean, like, they don't necessarily know how to ask somebody to meet their needs. They don't know how to
Right.
what they want or need to even have the conversation about it. But it's also internal. They they may not know. And again, this could be a whole other episode, but I think, and I know we're going to get into this in terms of solutions, and I don't necessarily want to head there just yet, but it requires taking a good look at ourselves.
Yes.
And to kind of bring this back all the way to the beginning about you aren't alone and that fear that some people have of walking into the office and the courage that that takes, it's really hard work.
Mhm,
It's really
mhm.
hard to acknowledge that maybe I have some guilt, maybe I have some shame, maybe my self esteem is
Yep.
in the toilet, or maybe just not even where I want it to be. And like you said too, people genuinely think that, oh my gosh, I am the only one experiencing this.
Right.
And I see that come out with the comparisons where people say, I look at this person and they have everything, their act is together. They know how to walk into a crowd and
Mhm,
talk. They know how
mhm.
to walk into a restaurant and be confident. And I always say to them, but you don't know what's happening on the inside. 9 out
Correct,
of 10 times, they're feeling the same way. It's just
correct. Yep.
they might be wearing a mask. One of the other things, and I kind of want to go back, and I'm sorry I forgot to mention this. Another big theme that I see around shame is conversations I have with people around medication.
Ah.
There is this, I mean, and I think it's really interesting because, of course, they're talking generally 9 out of 10 times it's about taking psych meds. And they feel again that there's a deficit, whether they aren't doing enough, they think can't, they're supposed to be able to think clearer so they don't need the medication, or their anxiety is supposed to, they should be able to keep it's the should haves, right? I should keep that in check. I should be capable of doing X. And one of the things I always say to people, obviously, is okay, if this were high blood pressure, would you feel the same way? If
Mhm.
your arm were
Right.
broken, would you feel the same way? And it's very interesting because I do think that is one of the stigmas that is still out there.
Yeah.
And that is a real tough one for people. And I think what's very hard too is a lot of, especially younger people, who are still very much maybe they're still living at home, or they're very, very close with their parents and their parents are a big influence, or even their, friends. But when they're with people that don't support it, they don't support the idea. They don't support the let's just explore this. Is medication, something that's going to be helpful for you? And it doesn't have to be forever. Maybe it's just a bridge. But that is a real big one. And I work a lot with people around that.
Absolutely. And may I add just one more thing to that that's
Mhm.
coming up for me as I listen to you? And you already touched on this, but I think it's worth just even going into a little bit more. So yeah, I really like that you wanted to bring in shame and guilt as like one of the top themes that we see over and over again, because there's no doubt in my mind that they're just in general there is shame attached to mental health issues,
Yes.
right? And there is a level of shame attached to it that you don't necessarily see if we were talking about a physical issue, like you had mentioned, the blood pressure medication. I mean,
Mhm.
think about, if somebody develops cancer, that is a horrific, tragic thing to go through, but I don't necessarily think that there's shame attached to it. At least I would hope there's not, right?
Right.
But think about the number of clients perhaps that you've had that come in with severe depression, that have
Mhm.
trouble getting out of bed, that have trouble keeping a job because their their symptoms of depression are so high
Mhm.
that it takes over their lives, right? There is a level of shame often, not always, but often attached to that. So I'm really glad that you're bringing you're bringing this up.
And I think to piggyback on that, you bring up an interesting point because I've seen a lot of progress around the stigma and shame that comes with mental illness. However, I say that, and it's around what I would call the more acceptable diagnoses.
Mm, mhm, mhm,
So I think we are accepting of depression. We are
mhm.
accepting of PTSD. We're accepting of anxiety. I think things like bipolar disorder, I
Yeah.
schizoaffective disorder, even personality disorders,
Mhm.
there's those are tough for some people and they're difficult for them to accept and to sometimes manage and share with other people. And I think especially the personality disorder things, that's they feel big for some people. And I think there's this hesitancy to even bring it up. I mean, I'll even have people say, well, I don't even know like if I should talk about this
Mhm,
or
mhm.
and sometimes more often than not it's curiosity. Um, but I think we still have a long way to go.
Exactly. Exactly. And I'm almost looking at it more as the level of shame that correlates with maybe the severity of the symptoms and the
Okay.
impact they might have rather than the diagnosis itself. But I think, it's 2 sides of the same coin, really.
Mhm.
But I know that I think mild to moderate levels of anxiety and depression I agree, are very we've come a long way, right, in its acceptance. But I find that, and this is again is just my own perspective, that when the symptoms are so severe that you can't get out of bed, at least my experience has been that the client, I'm not necessarily saying society, but the client themselves feels a level of shame that you wouldn't maybe feel again if you had that diagnosis, that medical
Mhm.
diagnosis that kept you from getting out of bed.
I totally agree. I think back to some of my most depressed clients, and the first thing, if they could get themselves to the office, the first thing
Mhm.
they would do is apologize
Yeah.
for, "I haven't showered in a week," or
Mhm.
"I'm still in
Mhm.
my pajamas."
Mhm.
And it would be so interesting because the first thing I would say to them is, "You're here.
Right.
That's what matters. You are here. That is
Yeah.
progress."
Yep. Beautiful. Yeah.
So, is there anything else you want to talk about in terms of themes? Do you want to head into solutions? Because solutions is kind of a big part of what we do here, too.
Absolutely. There is well, there's one other big theme. I It's so big, I'm just going to mention it, but we don't need to spend as much time on it today because I think again, it would possibly be its own episode in and of
Mhm.
itself. But just prior to getting into strategies, I think I had mentioned in the introduction when we were kind of just talking a little bit about ourselves that I'm really a big picture person.
Mm,
And so again, I'm constantly zooming out and peeling back these layers and seeing these themes. And one other big one I just want to mention, and I do think it's very tied to everything we've been talking about today. I think it's tied to not being enough. I think it's tied to guilt and shame. But I see a lot of times when clients come in that once we delve deep into some of these issues, that there's a real fear of being rejected.
mhm,
There's a real fear of being abandoned,
yes.
and there's a real fear even beneath the rejection and the abandonment of not being loved. And again, so I wanna be clear, I'm not saying all my clients come to me and say, "Oh, Megan, I'm here because I'm not lovable," or, "I'm coming to you because I'm afraid that I am, you know, that no one's going to love me." Or perhaps it's that I don't love myself, right?
Mhm,
But but I do see, again, as I peel back the layers of so much of what a client brings to me in session, when you get down to the bare bones of what's going on, there we just have these fears, right? That we are not lovable, that we are not enough. And I'm just feeling passionate to bring some light to that, right? And again, anyone who might be listening to this, that if you've ever felt like that in your life, just know that you are so not alone, and that
mhm,
I would say most everybody, at least at some point in their lives, have had that have been to that low place. So that's really, I think, all I need to say about that right now. I
okay.
don't know if you have anything you want to add.
I completely agree, and I now that we're talking about that, I would love for that to be its own episode.
Okay.
Fear is a big one, and it's it's rooted in a lot for different people, and it manifests in different ways, and I think it's very important because people do come in, and if you think of, again, I'm sound like a broken record, but going back to the very beginning where you said, it takes courage to walk into that door. of our office and sit down on the couch, that's fear. They're breaking through their fear. They're pushing against it and they're allowing themselves to be uncomfortable. And I think that's important. And it's like you said, I mean, I won't dwell on this, but it's tied to everything we've talked about today.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. So, does this feel like a good segue then, Sarah, to start talking about, some strategies to that we might recommend or maybe even that we use ourselves to really pull ourselves up and out of some of these very heavy, right? These feel like heavy things that clients come to us with. Is there anything that you want to start with as something that you might recommend to a client?
I think you actually touched on this earlier
Mhm.
when, and you can probably speak more to it, but it's you said my words that are nah, I can't speak today. Sorry. The overarching kind of a big picture lens, and I call it for me I call it the 30,000-foot view versus
Yep.
being in the weeds. And I think that's really important because it's very easy to stay in the muck. It's very easy to see all those details that feed into those negative beliefs that we have about ourselves. And if we take a bird's eye view, if we kind of say, okay, well, let's look at this in terms of the bigger picture, either how important is this? How true is this?
Mhm.
Um, I look at it as challenging. One, I can tell you when I take that 30,000-foot view, I physically feel a sense of relief.
Yes.
My body actually takes like it's that sigh. It's like, "Oh, okay. This isn't as dire as it feels." I'd be curious for you because I know you said this is a practice that you
Mhm.
generally engage in. So what does it look like for you to kind of take that bird's eye view?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and I think that there are so many ways and practices that we can try to help us get as you say, that bird's eye view, right? That and another word maybe I might use for it, even though I know we're talking about the same thing, is just it's distancing, right?
Mm,
It's distancing yourself, not disassociating, not burying your head in the sand. That's not what I'm talking about here, but putting some distance between your true self and whatever thought you're having about yourself that feels incredibly heavy, right? And so there are so many different ways that either I might do this myself personally or I might suggest to a client. One is so as I am a certified hypnotherapist, I'm big into the power of visualization, and
mm,
I'm big into the power of imagination, right? And so getting that, 30,000-foot view, as you said, maybe one way you could do that is to do some sort of just basic guided meditation or visualization where you may be visualizing yourself, say, somewhere outside, standing on the ground, and in front of you is that thought, right? Whatever that looming thought is. Let's just say it's, I'm not enough. Let's say it's, and we'll get a little more specific. Let's say I'm not enough at work,
mhm,
right? Like I'm doing a piss poor job and I'm not comparing with my colleague next to me who's whatever, right? You fill in the blanks there. There's a million different narratives we could use, but let's just say it has something to do with feeling badly about your job performance. And so you could visualize that thought literally like in front of you. And if it's right in front of you, it can look very big and it can feel very scary. But now let's visualize or imagine or feel that you are, and again, you can visualize this in whatever way feels right to you, but let's just say there's suddenly this jet in front of you, and you climb into the jet, and the jet propels you upward, and before you know it, you are flying up into the clouds, and you look down, and there's that thought, right? 30,000 feet below. And the it may sound simple, but even just the practice of that visualization can bring you, as you use the word relief, it can bring you that sense of relief that then will allow you, right, when you come back down to, maybe there is a change you need to make. Or maybe it really is just a matter of kind of reframing. I'm sure in our episodes in the future, we'll get into reframing, right? Because
Mhm.
that's a huge part of what we do.
Yes.
Um, maybe you reframe the thought that I'm doing horribly at work and I'm about ready to get fired to I'm going to learn the tools I need to do better, or maybe I really am doing a great job at work and this is all getting back to that self-esteem, right, that you talked about.
Mhm.
So I agree. I think that big picture thinking and zooming out is a great technique to start to practice.
And I think thank you for the example because I think that was a great visual that you just kind of walked all of us through, which is helpful. One of the other it's kind of interesting and I'd actually kind of like you to lead this one because I think this is something that you and I have talked about a lot and I we talk about it all the time just in terms of our friendship, but it's that idea of connection. And I think that's important in this. There's a lot of other things I want to kind of get to, but I think this one is really important in terms of one of the things when people come in and they feel like they're alone is because they also feel disconnected.
Yes.
So I'm curious, what does the idea of connection mean to you, whether that's professionally and or personally?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great question. And right, we can loop it again back to the title of this whole episode, You Are Not Alone. So I think that connectedness can I think we can feel connectedness in so many different ways. One might be just again taking this big picture view of learning that we are all human, and your problems may be, whatever your issues are, whatever self-improvement you may be working on, just even knowing and really letting it sink in that we're all in the same boat, right?
Mhm.
It looks different. Our stories are different, but at the end of the day, we are experiencing very similar things with millions of other people. That in and of itself, I think, could be connectedness, right?
Mhm.
It could be practicing a sense of connectedness. So that's one way. Another way is what certainly what you just brought up. Friendship, like true friendship,
Mhm.
right? Like friendship where you trust the other
Mhm.
person enough to make mistakes. And know that they're still going to right? That they're not gonna walk away from you.
Right.
Um, the connectedness between, you and I now have known each other, gosh, for several years. We
Yes.
met in a professional setting, but it's turned into something, right? Quite more than that. At least I know
Mhm.
I feel that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the connectedness you can feel with another person in friendship. Certainly the connectedness you can feel with a partner, right? Like a whether it's a spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend, or you know any kind of partner where you just feel that support, right? That you feel that level of support.
Mhm.
Now I fully realize though not every single person right now in this moment feels like they have that.
Right.
So I'll add one other way that I think that I know I practice this level of connection, literally going outside into nature
Mhm.
and, hopefully this won't sound too woo woo, but literally like I can go for a walk in my woods and feel very connected to something higher than myself just by way of listening to the birds
Mhm.
or just looking at the trees and just feeling that kind of life force that's there and realizing, yeah, that life force that's in the tree is in myself too. So you can feel connected with nature. Animals is a huge one. We're both real animal lovers,
Mhm.
right? So my point is that there's so many different ways to feel connected, and it is key, I think, in a lot of ways to feeling better, right? To feeling like you are enough. Yep, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I completely agree, and one of the things that I often will say to clients is do an assessment of where you're connected, and whether that's if you're
Yeah.
visual, if you need to draw it out or write it out. A lot of clients, I will support them in connecting to their spiritual communities, to you bring up friends. I think it's about knowing which friends are going to be able that you can have these maybe deeper level of conversations where you trust it's okay to be vulnerable and
Mhm.
kind of let them in a little bit more. I will throw out there to people if there are support groups that
Yes.
that are moderated and there's a facilitator, not one that's just kind of a bitch session. Um, but I also encourage people to think outside the box and try to connect in ways that they've never thought of before. Trying new activities,
Yep.
joining, you mentioned nature. I have had a lot of people who are they might be alone and they're like, well, I don't want to go on a hike because I don't want to be by myself and I don't have a partner. So there are meetup groups that
Yeah.
do that, checking in terms of your town, in terms of what activities are out there, exercise, things like that. I think and even thinking about what are your interests that allow you to connect, whether that's music or art or, whatever your passions are. And that's one thing I think, again, when we feel like we're in the weeds, it's hard to take that broader perspective and say, okay, how
Mhm.
can I connect and how do I want to connect? Because for some
Mhm.
that's also scary, but it is, like you said, it's critical because as humans, even those of us that don't necessarily want to always be around people, uh,
Right.
we need people. We need to
Yeah.
have those relationships, and that it is that connection.
Absolutely, and I think what I'm taking from this is that we both it sounds like we both feel and we both realize that that connection can it can be cultivated in so many different ways. It doesn't just have to be, "Oh, this is, connecting with a romantic partner,"
Right.
or even a BFF, right? Like a best
Mhm.
friend forever. Those are wonderful, don't get me
Mhm.
wrong. But if you right now in this moment are not experiencing those level of connections, there's still plenty of other ways for you to start connecting.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. Beautiful.
There's 2 other points I wanna throw out there, if that's
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
and they're connected.
Mhm.
I think one of the things that's very important is to and it's hard, but it is to have a positive mindset. So it's paying attention to that inner dialogue and, what are you saying to yourself? What messages are you giving yourself? And again, this could be its own cognitive behavioral episode, but
Mhm.
I think and what I think is important is to then also tie in that positivity with an honest assessment of where you are and your progress.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy for people to get down on themselves and say, it's again, I'm not doing enough or I didn't, I should have, could have, would have kinds of
Yeah.
things. And that, of course, brings me to perfection and even thinking about an honest assessment of one's progress. So I don't know how many minutes ago, but you all heard me say, okay, I guess I don't know how to talk today. And the perfectionistic part of me was like, oh crap, I can't believe I just did that. Like I felt like this was going well. And then I threw this monkey wrench in there. And my head spun to, do we need to go back and edit that out? And then there was no, why would you edit that out? Part of this is being human and you're not perfect. And hey, by the way, this is the first time we've ever done this.
Right.
So that's that
Right.
honest assessment part, right? Like I'm actually pretty proud of how this is going. And I had a choice where I could let that human error screw up my whole perspective of this. And I didn't let it. I let the internal dialogue be, hey, you're doing this. Be proud of yourself. This is cool.
100%. I'm so glad you just brought that up, right? Because you're showing in real time, right? Like that was you just shared with me and with our listeners this
Hmm.
like little vulnerability, we could call it, right? Like it was a moment of vulnerability where, ah, shit, right? Like I fumbled on my words, right? Who doesn't fumble on their words?
Right.
Right, and so I love that you shared your process with us too, that you felt you had a moment where you felt badly about it, but then it sounds like pretty quickly you were able to kinda change that inner dialogue, right?
Right.
And so those are the yeah, I love that you shared that because that's what we want to share with our clients, right?
Yes.
It's like
Yeah.
we're all human, we're all in this together. So, I love that. I absolutely love that. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Is there anything else in terms of solutions that you wanted to throw out there before we wrap up today?
I feel pretty good about where we're leaving this. I love that we ended with what you shared. So I feel good right now.
Okay, great. Well, we would like to thank everyone for joining us today. We certainly do love having you here. And please, as we mentioned earlier, tune in next time when our next episode is going to be talking about overwhelm and what you can do about it. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
If you want to share your thoughts or ideas with us, you can email us at therapyunpluggedpodcast@me. Until next time, be sure to subscribe to Therapy Unplugged, Empowerment, Laughter, and Life on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere you find your podcasts.